The Basement Tenant, a novel, written by L.Z. Sinclaire, narrated by L.Z. Sinclaire.
Chapter 24, Home. Margaret Osei was sitting on a cot in a sealed room that was the twin of the one in Carrie's basement. She was thinner than the photograph in her missing persons file. The flesh drawn back from the bones of her face as if her body had been consuming itself in the absence of adequate fuel. She wore a house dress that had been washed until the pattern was faded. Her hair was gray, cropped close, and her eyes, large, dark, alert, moved around the room with the bewildered focus of a person who had spent so long in a small space that the larger world had become disorienting. She was alive. She was sitting upright. She was holding a pen, a blue ballpoint, nearly out of ink, as if she'd been writing when the door opened and hadn't set it down because the pen was the only thing in the room that was truly hers. Carrie saw her through the basement window, a small rectangle at ground level that the officers had cleared. She saw her, and she pressed her hand against the car window, and something inside her broke open, not breaking apart, but breaking open, the way a seed breaks open, the way a locked room breaks open when someone finally, after months or years, puts a shoulder to the door. Carrie was carried out on a stretcher, though she protested. "I can walk. I have been walking in that room for 8 months. I can walk." And the protest itself was a form of survival, the insistence on agency by a person from whom all agency had been taken. Carrie got out of the car. She shouldn't have. Ruiz would be furious, but she was out of the car and on the sidewalk before the decision registered, her body moving the way it had moved through the wall in the basement, the way it had moved to the phone to call Ruiz, the way the body moves when the mind's caution has finally, irreversibly been overwritten by the body's need to be present. The paramedics brought Margaret out through the front door. She was wrapped in a shock blanket, silver, reflective, the material they used for marathon runners and disaster survivors. Her face was visible above the blanket, and it was the face from the missing persons photo, but also not. The same bone structure, the same dark eyes, but thinner. The flesh receded, the skin ashen from months without sunlight. Her hair was shorter. Her hands, visible where they gripped the edge of the structure, were trembling. Not from cold, from the specific vibration of a body that had been holding itself still for so long that the permission to move was a kind of shock. Margaret turned her head. She looked at Carrie. It was a long look, not the quick assessment of a stranger, but the searching, specific gaze of a person who has heard you before seeing you, who knows the sound of your footsteps, the rhythm of your coffee machine, the pattern of your pacing, and is now matching a face to the architecture of sound she has memorized from below. Carrie stepped forward. The paramedics paused. "I'm Carrie," she said. "I live above you. I lived above you." Margaret's eyes moved across her face, reading it the same way Elias read people, not by what they showed, but by what lived underneath. And then Margaret's hand came out from under the blanket, thin, trembling, the nails short and clean, because even in captivity she had maintained what she could, and she took Carrie's hand. "I heard you walking," Margaret said. Her voice was the voice from the recordings, the voice from the floor, low, steady, worn smooth by months of singing to herself in the dark. Every night I heard you walking above me, and I thought, she is looking for something too. Carrie couldn't speak. She held Carrie's hand, the thin, warm, living hand of a woman who had been beneath her feet for 11 weeks and who had sung so that someone might hear. And she nodded, because nodding was all she could do. And Margaret nodded back, and the nod was enough. It was everything. The paramedics loaded her into the ambulance. The doors closed. The lights came on, red and white, cycling, the lights of rescue. And the ambulance pulled away down Maryland Avenue, past the church with its marquee, past the vacant lot, past the brownstones that stood like witnesses along a block that had seen everything and would continue seeing everything long after the humans who lived in them had gone. Carrie stood on the sidewalk and watched the ambulance until it turned the corner and was gone. Then she stood there a moment longer in the cold, because the cold felt more honest than anything she had felt in a very long time. In the basement, behind Margaret's room, the officers found 2 other sealed spaces, both recently vacated. In one, bedding, water bottles, and a stack of documents, powers of attorney, property transfer agreements, blank signature pages. In the other, a laptop with financial records showing payments to the contracting crew, the property managers, the network of people who had kept this pipeline running. And in the laptop's email archive, correspondence between Alderman Raymond Cross and Derek Weaver discussing acquisition challenges and logistics challenges in the bloodless, euphemistic language of men who had learned to commit crimes in prose that could survive a deposition. Ruiz bagged the evidence. Chen photographed the rooms. The officers secured the building, and Carrie stood on the sidewalk in Woodlawn, in the neighborhood that the LLC had been buying one basement at a time, and she looked at the church across the street. Sunday service, 10 a.m. God is not finished with you. And she thought about Margaret, who had sung hymns in a sealed room for 8 months, and she thought about God, in whom she was not sure she believed, and she thought that if God existed, he owed Margaret O'Sane an apology and a conversation that lasted at least as long as the silence. Derek was arrested at his office on LaSalle Street at 6:30 p.m. Carrie did not see this. She heard about it from Beth, who called her with a voice that trembled between professional composure and something almost like awe. They took him out of the building. Lawrence Gill is already at the station. What about Cross? FBI picked him up separately. They're treating it as a federal case. Wire fraud, conspiracy, elder abuse across multiple properties. The state charges will follow. Carrie sat in her kitchen. The brownstone was quiet. The basement door was opened. It would never be latched again, she knew, because locked doors were a thing she no longer believed in. Not in the protective sense, not in the sense that closing something kept you safe. The custody motion, she said. Dead. I spoke to Judge Halloran's clerk. The motion is being withdrawn. Under the circumstances, Beth paused. Under the circumstances was doing a lot of work in that sentence, carrying the weight of kidnapping charges and federal indictments and the complete inversion of every claim Derek had made about Carrie's stability. Under the circumstances, the court will revisit the custody arrangement with you as the primary custodial parent. Miles, Carrie said. Miles comes home. She hung up. She walked to the basement door. She stood there for a long time, looking down the stairs into the dark apartment where Elias had lived, where Margaret's voice had been played through a phone speaker to test the acoustics of a wall, where the hidden room still gaped open behind the torn drywall. She went down. She stood in the room, Margaret's room, and looked at the bare concrete walls and the place where the cot had been and the place where the notebook had been. The room was empty now, evidence removed, but the room itself was evidence, the dimensions, the sealed walls, the cold, and Carrie stood in it and breathed the air that Margaret had breathed and felt the smallness of the space press against her and understood in her body what 11 weeks in this room would do to a person, what it would take from you, what it would leave. She went back upstairs. She sat at the kitchen table and put her head in her hands and breathed. Just breathed, the way her therapist had taught her. 4 counts in, 7 hold, 8 out. Except this time the breathing wasn't management, wasn't performance, wasn't the disciplined containment of a woman proving she was stable. It was just breathing, the involuntary animal act of a person who has surfaced from deep water and is filling her lungs with air. She picked Miles up at Derek's apartment. The building was taped with yellow crime scene markers, though the officers let her inside to get her son. Miles was in his room, sitting on the bed, wearing his Linden Academy uniform, even though it was Saturday. He was holding a book he wasn't reading. He looked up when she came in, and his face, her eyes, Derek's jaw, his own expression, always his own, showed not fear, but the terrible comprehension of a child who has understood more than anyone told him and has been waiting patiently for the adults to catch up. "Are we going home?" he asked. "We're going home." "Is Dad in trouble?" She knelt beside the bed. She took his hands. They were small and warm, and she could feel his pulse in his wrists, rapid, a bird's heartbeat. "Yes, Bug, Dad is in trouble." "Because of the lady in the basement?" She closed her eyes. Because of the lady in the basement. He'd known. Not the details, not the LLC or the sealed rooms or the power of attorney documents, but the essential fact, the thing at the center. There was a lady in the basement and no one had listened. "Yes," she said, "because of the lady in the basement. I heard her singing. I know, I heard her too." "You believed me?" "I always believed you, sweetheart. It just took me a while to believe myself." He put his arms around her neck. She held him. She breathed. Monday morning, the Linden Academy, 7:58 a.m. Carrie pulled up to the drop-off line in the brownstone's old Volvo, a car she'd kept because it ran and because trading it for something newer felt like admitting that her life required updates she couldn't afford. Miles was in the back seat, blazer pressed, tie straight, the math workbook he'd been missing found finally under the couch in his backpack. The drop-off line at Linden was a choreography, SUVs and Teslas gliding forward in sequence, doors opening and closing with the precision of a ballet that cost $42,000 a year to attend. The mothers stood in their clusters near the entrance, coffees in hand, the morning social audit already in progress. Vanessa Aldrich was at the center. She always was. She stood on the limestone steps in a camel coat, an Hermes scarf, a smile that served as both greeting and checkpoint. She saw Carrie's car. The smile remained, but something behind it, the gears of the social machinery, stuttered. By now, everyone knew. The news had broken Sunday night. Chicago alderman and prominent attorney charged an elder fraud scheme. The Tribune ran it above the fold. Channel 7 led with it. The details were everywhere. The sealed basements, the forged documents, the elderly woman held for 8 months, the brownstone on Belden Avenue where the evidence was found. Carrie's name wasn't in the articles. Ruiz had kept her out of the initial reports. But Lincoln Park was a village, and villages talked. And by Monday morning, every mother in the Linden Academy pickup line knew that Caroline Whitfield Weaver's basement had been a crime scene, and her ex-husband had been perp-walked out of his LaSalle Street office in handcuffs. Carrie parked. She got out. She opened Miles's door. He climbed out, backpack on, and took her hand. They walked toward the entrance. Carrie was wearing jeans and a sweater, not the pickup line armor, not the concealer and neutral lip and pulled back hair. Just clothes, just herself. She hadn't taken the Lexapro that morning, not because she was quitting, but because she'd forgotten, and the forgetting felt significant, felt like a crack in the structure of the person she'd been forced to become. Dana Prescott stood near the entrance. She opened her mouth. "How are you really?" And then closed it, because the question that had been a weapon for 14 months had suddenly become unanswerable. Carrie nodded at her. Just a nod. The barest acknowledgement. Dana nodded back. Vanessa stepped forward. Her mouth opened. For the first time in the 2 years Carrie had known her, through the marriage and the divorce and the gala committees and the group texts and the yellow heart emojis and the birthday party list that didn't include Miles, Vanessa Aldrich didn't know what to say. Carrie walked past her without stopping. Miles squeezed her hand. She squeezed back. He went through the school doors. She watched him disappear into the stream of navy blazers and gray slacks, and then she stood there on the limestone steps of the most expensive school in Chicago and let the morning air hit her face. She didn't look at the other mothers. She didn't check to see if they were watching. She turned and walked back to the car and drove home. The brownstone was quiet, not the suffocating quiet of the last 14 months, the silence that had felt like abandonment, like the house itself was withdrawing from her. This was a different kind of quiet, settled, patient, the quiet of a house that had given up its secrets and was resting. She walked through the kitchen, made coffee, stood at the window and looked out at the gangway, the concrete steps, the side door that had opened and closed 100 times in the dark. She walked to the basement door, opened it, went down. The apartment was empty, the bed stripped, the textbooks gone, the closet bare. Even the coffee, the dark, expensive-looking bag, was gone. Elias had cleared out completely with the thoroughness of a man who knew how to leave without leaving traces. The hole in the back wall was still there. Beyond it, the room, Margaret's room, gaped empty, the cot and the water bottles removed as evidence. Just the concrete walls and the floor and the small battery-powered lantern which someone had turned off. Carrie went back upstairs. On the kitchen counter, propped against the salt shaker, was a note, handwritten. The same neat small script she'd seen on the lease, precise, each letter placed like a stone in a path. You were right about everything, even the parts about me. She read it twice. She folded it. She didn't smile. She sat down at the kitchen table. She opened her laptop. The screen glowed in the morning light, and she looked at it, the blank document, the cursor blinking, and she thought about Elias Osei writing in a composition notebook in a sealed room, scratching her existence into paper with a $2 pen because the act of writing was the act of being alive. She thought about the porch and the wine and Elias asking who was the woman before her. She was fearless. She was really fucking fearless. Carrie put her hands on the keyboard. She typed a headline. The Basements, How a Chicago alderman and a real estate attorney disappeared the South Side's elders, by Caroline Whitfield. Not Whitfield Weaver, not anymore. She wrote. The coffee grew cold, the house held its breath around her, and for the first time in 3 years, the silence wasn't empty, it was full. Full of the story she was finally telling, full of the woman she was finally becoming, full of the sound of keys striking a screen in a brownstone on Belden Avenue, where something terrible had happened and something true was being built on top of it.
The end. You have been listening to The Basement Tenant, written by L.V. Sinclaire, narrated by L.V. Sinclaire. Thank you for listening.